Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is session 15. There's something I want to say right at the outset here that I think is important. It's not in your notes, but as I'm saying this, I want to make sure that everybody has one of those big timelines. If you don't have, Brother Tommy doesn't have one. Can I pass this back or something? There you go, brother. And if you'll handle, just have them at the back, and if anybody comes in, they can do that. I know that as we were going through these timelines, there's the possibility that they become somewhat messy as you're adding things, and then it kind of starts looking like my whiteboard. And I was trying to alleviate that, so I cleaned it all up, gave you a much bigger page. Before it's over, we'll be printing them on large posters like this so we can get everything on there. But we have a lot to add to the timeline today, and so there'll be places there to add those things, so I wanted to do that. Oh, by the way, since it popped into my head, I will tell you that we have folks from down under in Australia that are following us now as sons and daughters, and they're really excited. And we got our first contact from anyone in the United Arab Emirates that is now following the Sonship education. So if you can imagine, I was pretty excited about that, and I don't know who that is. So if they listen to the DVD, they'll know who they are, and we're really excited that they're following along with Sonship. So, about the time you kind of get used to things rocking along in the status quo, all of a sudden you hear from somebody in another part of the world, and they're hearing stuff for the first time, and they're so excited. Oh, this is really great, and so I can't, anyway, I'm sharing that with you, and it's wonderful news. Anyway, and you know what, and you should be, because, what's taking place here is going far beyond this group. And so we're grateful for the opportunity of all that. And there's a lot of folks involved in that. We appreciate Rebecca doing the filming tonight in Wayne's absence. He got lazy. He stayed home to watch TV. I don't know. And actually, he's working. And so, anyway, we're awfully glad she was here last time and again this time. Thanks, Rebecca, for doing that. Appreciate Wayne getting all that stuff online. There's a lot of folks that do stuff behind the scenes that make this possible. John?
Speaking of that filming, if you could check, because my mom said that it's getting you.
Right now?
Yeah, that she's seeing just
because
you.
it's on the window, it's him.
I asked her.
Earlier it was me, when we did a test on another day. Right now it's me?
And I said, just now I just said, is she still?
Well, you're a better subject.
Let me ask her.
Okay, look, I know Rebecca is way easier to look at than I am, but really, come on. Okay. Okay, well, I'll let them iron that out while we finish this little part up here. They can hear the audio, though, no doubt, right? Okay. So anyway, let me just kind of give this little disclaimer here at the first, and that is, it is important, folks, for us to understand that. In fact, here's what we're going to do. We're actually going to we're going to. Oh, okay. I just want to make sure they weren't trying to get my attention. What we're going to do is, I gave you some notes last time. It had self-test at the end. Did you work through that? Boy, I really hope so, because those are the things that will help you gauge if you're really getting the important things that we need to get out of this. And it's okay if you looked at some of those questions and said, oh, you know what, I got to go look at the notes. That's fine. That's why we hand out the notes, so that you'll be able to do that. But look, doing that work is important. I'm trying to say this in a way where I don't become your tutor and governor. But do you know why homework is important? I mean, when it originally was fulfilling its purpose, other than the fact of teachers trying to get even with kids who have given them grief all week long, what homework is really about is for you to be able to go home and put yourself through the process to see if you've mastered the material. If you can go home and you can do that homework, then you realize, I can do this. If you can't, then that's a sign that there's something that you didn't get, something that you didn't learn. Well, here you are again in the midst of an education in sonship. And I want to make sure that you're getting it. And so that's why I designed this little self-test at the end. So we're going to go over those answers. But look, what I'm saying to you here at the outset before we go through them is I am a little bit reluctant to do it this way because I don't want you to start feeling like this is just questions and answers that I memorize. I want you to see it as more than just data. But this has to be something that, yeah, you do need to learn it, but it needs to go beyond that. It really needs to get inside of you and change you and become who you are, that you really start thinking about it this way. And so with that kind of out of the way, or, you know, the questions that you need to be asking yourself are like this. Now that as we go through here and we see the answers to these questions, you have to be saying to yourself during the week, what does this mean to me? How does this get utilized in my sonship life? What difference does it make if I know this? That's the questions you really have to be able to answer for yourself for this to take the practical use that it's designed to do. And I will tell you, it's for that reason right there that sonship churches will never be the largest churches in town, because it requires something out of the people that attend. Because what most people want to do is show up, punch the clock, go home, and not think about it again until they come back the next Sunday. It can't be this way. And what we're about to be engaged in this operation of laboring with our Father against the adversary and this policy of evil is going to demand that it's more than that. And so I'm just really encouraging you with all I can to make this, you know, something that you're really looking at, that it's living with you. And you know what? And here's the last thing I'll say about it. This needs to become one of the prayer issues. You want to talk about sonship prayer? It's taking these very kinds of issues and talking to your Heavenly Father about it. Is this thing really working in me? Do I see this happening? That kind of issue. Okay, all that out of the way, let's go to the PowerPoint now and let's take a look at these. So what is Paul referring to when he writes, the night is far spent, the day is at hand? And we have an answer here. He's referring to the timing of when God brought in this dispensation of grace. Now, you're going to learn more about that as we go through, but does everybody get that? He's referring to he's not referring to the time of the dispensation of grace. He's referring to the timing of when it was brought in. In other words, when it was brought in, the night was far spent, and when it's over, the day will be at hand. And we have a lot to talk about with regard to those terms. Let's do the next one. What are we supposed to realize about the timing of when? Trent, do I have a deal in there that has just the questions on it? Or did I put the answers on every frame? Because I wanted to give folks a little bit of a chance to answer these before we gave them the... No, okay, that's all right. Go back to the second question. That's fine. I didn't put it together right. What are we supposed to realize about the timing of when God brought in this dispensation of grace? Well, here's the 4 things, or 5. Number 1, we realize the nation of Israel reached a point of ungodliness that merited God's wrath. Does everybody understand that? That's what was happening in the nation. But there was more in the world than just the nation. There was the world at large. So we also realize the world at large had again become the world of the ungodly. Why do I say again become the world of the ungodly? Yeah, because prior to the flood, it had become the world of the ungodly, and God destroyed it. And it also merited God's righteous judgment. Everybody understand that? Okay, let's go to number 3. The ungodliness of the world has not diminished, but it continues to increase during this dispensation of grace. And there are passages of Scripture that we can look at that indicate that. Don't get to looking that because you live where you live and everybody's kind of nice to you in your neighborhood, that the ungodliness of the world has diminished. It has not. The darkness is still as dark as it has ever been. And I'm going to say something about that, by the way. Let me just put up this real rough outline. I should have got this done in a different way, but I didn't. And let's do here's that extension of mercy, and here's the parenthesis of the dispensation of grace. And what is happening is and on your chart there's a deal here that talks about the night, and it runs down like this, and then here's that, the day of the Lord's wrath. right here, and then you have the setup of the kingdom here, and but here you have this thing on your, if you look on your timeline, you've got a strip down there that says the night of increasing darkness or something like that. And that, do you see it? Okay. Now, and you'll notice that I very artistically, I hate to say that, Bob will be so jealous, but artistically, the night, you see the colors getting darker. I'm trying to illustrate that the night is increasing because, look, I'm just going to say this to you now. We're going to talk about the details of it later. The reason this is true, that the ungodliness of the world is not diminished, is because there was, when it came to this place, Romans 13:12, right here, when the timing of the dispensation of grace, when the night was far spent, this darkness needed to continue. The night needed, there's just 100 things we ought to say it. If we had known everything we needed to know up to Romans 13:12, just reading that expression, the night is far spent, you would have, and I would have, immediately recognized that this was something Satan was doing because of the use of the word night. We're going to look at this terminology so that we start to get real familiar with the terminology, so that we understand that when Paul's using these kinds of terms of light and darkness and day and night, he is drawing some parallels about what we know about physical light and physical darkness. It's not talking about, when he's talking about the works of darkness, he's not talking about the darkness of the cycle of night in a 24-hour day. He's talking about something in the spiritual realm. But there are some parallels that allows him to use those kind of terms. And just if you had seen that term, the night is far spent. You remember, Loopy, when you and John and Mark, remember we were all meeting together and we were talking about these. If we had known everything we needed to know, we would have read that term and it said the night is far spent. We'd have went, you know what? This is something that Satan is producing in the world. This is something he's doing. We would have known that. But you have to learn that. And unfortunately, you have to learn it by getting it wrong before you can get it right. But here's my point. This night of increasing darkness, and again, I'm going back to talk to you, just introducing this concept to you. The ungodliness of the world is not diminished, but it continues. And it has to continue. Because what is happening is that this darkness is going to continue all the way up the day of the Lord's wrath. This is night right here. And there is a portion of night that will still follow once the dispensation of grace has come to an end. And listen to this carefully. There is something that Satan is seeking to do in the remaining portion of that night that absolutely requires that during this dispensation of grace, the night of darkness is at a rolling boil, so to speak. In other words, he cannot afford for this thing to taper off or diminish during the dispensation of grace, because once it comes to an end and Israel's program is resumed and he has this final portion of his night, there is something that Satan is intensifying at that particular time, and John is going to warn the believing remnant in his 3 epistles of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John about this issue. And if this thing already doesn't have a full head of steam, so to speak, if it's not already powerfully racing downhill, it's not going to get to where he wants it to get. And so it's imperative for him that it's not just about, because he's in the dispensation of grace, he's putting the pedal to the metal, so to speak. He is. But it's more than that. There is something that is sitting out here that he can't do until Israel's program is resumed. And when that happens, there is an intensification that's going to take place in the darkness out there. And we're going to talk about that today. And because of that, he needs this head of steam coming out of the dispensation of grace. And when you cast off the works of darkness, you know what you're doing? You're slowing down the engine that is producing that night of darkness. In other words, you are now standing in the way of the very thing that this whole thing is going to culminate in. Have you ever been on the interstate and I put it on cruise when we come out here, and you go up and down the hills, and every once in a while here comes a truck, and he's going to pass you. And so he gets about halfway past you, and all of a sudden you hit a hill, and all of a sudden you realize, and there he goes. He's back behind you again. And depending on how much hill he's got to go, he may just get behind you again and wait. And when he gets to the downhill side, here he comes again. Casting off the works of darkness is like making Satan's tractor trailer move uphill. It's losing momentum. And because he is pointing this whole thing, yes, it is doing things in the dispensation of grace. But it is necessary that he has a full head of steam, because when he gets out here, there's something that he is going to produce that can only be accomplished if this thing comes out of the dispensation of grace at full speed. And by casting off the works of darkness, you're putting a governor on the policy of evil's engine, so to speak. And that's what provokes the response from the adversary. Because it's not just that you're now put on the armor of light, although that's a part of it, but it's that you have hindered an ultimate plan that is he's got to do something now to get to where he's going then. Look, when we drove home and there was ice on the roads, you know what you find out? And you have to kind of nuance it. If I don't have enough speed, I can't make it up that hill. If I have too much speed, if I top that hill and somebody's, traffic is all piled up, I'm in trouble. So you got to kind of nuance that, right? I need to get to the top, but I don't need to be flying over the top. Well, for Satan, he does need to be flying over the top. But if he can't get enough speed to get up that hill, because there are some sons and daughters who are casting off the works of darkness, and there's a reason why that phrase is doing the very thing I'm describing here, you realize you are now messing with his ultimate goal. And he is not going to stand for that. That's why there's a response. This is not just about, he looked down in a world of darkness and bink, a little light came on. I mean, that is something. It is something. I'm not trying to act like that's nothing, but there's more to it than just that. And I'm trying to kind of give you that picture. So when I tell you the ungodliness of the world is not diminished, that is only part of the story of this night of increasing darkness that he is continuing to push, because that has to be just that way. Okay, give me the next one. I spent way too long on that. God is being long-suffering during this dispensation of grace, but his attitude toward the ungodliness of the world has not changed, and his anger has not lessened. People want to look like, you know what, and here's what, because God's not imputing the consequences of men's sins to them when they commit sin during the dispensation of grace, and so you know what they think? They think they got away with it. And God doesn't care. Or that's what some people think. God doesn't care. He does care. We've seen plenty of scriptures that talk about how his attitude, describe his attitude toward the ungodliness that's in this world. And I know that some of you may think that's been overkill, but I've done that to establish these very things in your thinking. So, number 5, once this dispensation of grace is ended, God will judge the world at large and the apostate element of Israel by means of his day of wrath. Did everybody understand what we talked about so far? Okay. Next, why is it important to understand God's attitude toward the ungodliness of the world and how he views the world at large? Because if this doctrine is going to do its work in us, we have to have the same attitude generated in us that is in our Heavenly Father. Now, I'm going to add one thing to that. We not only need to feel the same way about it that he does, we need to feel the same way about it for the same reasons he does. Because if our reasons don't match his, then if circumstances change, we may not hate the ungodliness of the world so much anymore. So it's got to be, we feel about it like he does for the same reasons he does. Everybody get that? Okay, so let's move to the next one. The phrase, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, is intended to produce a particular kind of thinking in us. What does that thinking consist of? And so the answer I've given you, and you can use a little different terminology, but an understanding of all that is behind Romans 13:12a, which is that first, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, is intended to produce a disgust, a hatred, an abhorrence, an objectiveness for Satan's works of darkness and for the ungodliness that those works produce in the world. And all of those terms and more are the very kinds of terms that the Scripture uses. God is going to look at those things and He's going to say, those things I hate. It's not just, well, you know, they just mean well, but they're just not getting it right. He says, I hate it. I abhor it. That's a description of His attitude about that. And so if we don't know what He's thinking, we won't know how we're supposed to think about it. What are the 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant? When do they take place? And we put those on the timeline, right? This one has, and this one, you have those on your timeline already filled in, right? You have the Redeemer, and then when you get over here in the Lord's Day of Wrath, you have the Deliverer, and I did not put that at the very start of the Lord's Day of Wrath. Anybody remember why? Yeah, because He won't be delivering, and as a matter of fact, we went back over to the Psalms last time, and we saw the believing remnant saying, Lord, where are you? Why do you stand so far off when this is happening? We expect that we're going to be delivered, and you're not delivering us. But there's a period of time when God doesn't put that mandate of the Davidic covenant into function yet. Why? Well, what is it, huh? Yeah, because suffering works in their sonship life just like it works in ours. And there are things that have to be accomplished in them. So at the beginning of that day of wrath, when there is suffering going on, and they're going, Lord, why are you standing so far off? You know, we thought, you know, in fact, they even talk about, you hate the ungodliness, and here it is. What are you going to do about it? But there's something being produced in them through the suffering as well. And then that deliverer mandate kicks in. Over here at the great and terrible day of the Lord, the avenging concept kicks in. And then I'm going to do it like this here. King and blesser, because they both start happening at the same time at the start of the kingdom. All right, so those are the 5 mandates, and there they are, and we outline them just that way. All right, next one. What marked the beginning of the climactic stage in Israel's program? And I told you this last week, and it should be on your timeline. That started with John the Baptist. And then, what's next? The climactic stage in Israel's program included which parts of the 5th course of punishment? It includes the 4th, which runs from John the Baptist. So let's put him right up here. John the Baptist. It runs from John the Baptist to the end of the extension of mercy. And that should be demonstrated on your timeline with the climactic stage. Is that in, what is that in? Oh, okay, it's that little gray one. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, it's that little gray bar. Does everybody see that? So there's the 4th. There's the 4th installment of the 5th course of punishment. And it also, the climactic stage also includes the 5th installment of the 5th course of punishment, which runs from the resumption of the program to the second advent of Jesus Christ. Now, I know there were some things that I was going to, oh man. Okay, let's just do the next one. We'll come back. What outstanding issues? But did everybody understand that, by the way? What I just called the climactic stage starts with John the Baptist. You're not counting. The dispensation of grace is not part of the climactic stage of Israel's program. Okay? What you've got to sort out in your mind is that some things continued in the dispensation of grace and some things did not. Now, we're going to cover this, but just to say it to you now, when Israel is in that fourth installment of the fifth course of punishment, when Israel's program got interrupted, so did that installment of judgment. But the night, in other words, did Satan quit working because we had a dispensation of grace? No. His night continues on. Did the ungodliness of the world get interrupted? No. No, that did not get interrupted, because while Satan was working with the nation of Israel, he was also down here working with Gentiles. Just because God's program with Israel got interrupted, what God was doing with them is what got interrupted. What Satan was doing in the world, he didn't take a break and go, well, I think I'll take a little vacation here till the dispensation of grace is over. No, he's still working. So there's some things that continued. The climactic stage got interrupted. Why? It's the climactic stage of God's program with Israel. So that got interrupted. It will start back, and over here, there's the fifth. Okay, everybody's got that. All right, so what outstanding issue is being accomplished during the climactic stage of Israel's program? Well, you've already seen it. It's when this thing started here that you have those mandates of the Davidic covenant being established. Those all are going to be happening, and in that climactic stage, they better, because when are they going to get done then? Because now you're almost at the end of what God's doing with the nation. Which stuff are you talking about? The mandates?
Yeah, the wrath and
Yes.
he's so arrogant.
Yeah, I do believe he knows that. And so that kind of begs the question then why go through all of this? And the reason is because of what he can produce in other words, he's made his rebellion. There is no atonement for that. If there you are, you only have one of two choices. You can just roll over and I'm finished, or he does have a lot of pride, or what he is going to be able to accomplish in the meantime to prove that God is not the rightful possessor of heaven and earth. That's what he's after. And here's how he'll do that. Not only will he corrupt Israel in her understanding and take the Gentile nations to every god in the world except for the true God, in this dispensation of grace, I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. What is going on? Okay. That's okay. It's okay. Look, no one will ever know it was Linda right there. Okay, so anyway. All right. So I'm kidding. All right, I'm just having fun. Look, Linda will forgive me, okay. But Ron pointed at you. I just want you to know. Okay, so in this, what were we talking about? Yeah, in this dispensation of grace, here's what he is really after. You're going to be the rightful possessor of heaven and earth, and these folks that are going to be members of the church, the body of Christ, what if they function every day in doctrine that opposes the mystery of Christ? I'm just saying, do you understand what he's doing with that? He's doing is saying, hey, these are the folks that are going to put in position of heaven, but they don't even know what's going on. They don't even know what's going on. In fact, just look at the signs on the churches. They think they're coming here. You know what? And that was an enigma for a while. Hey, you remember when the Conleys remember Alan and Pauline? And I remember Pauline asked me a question one time. It was a really good question. I'm not denigrating the question. It was just, I didn't have the full answer for it. But she said, I know that we're the only ones promised glorified bodies. Why do we get that privilege and nobody else does? And I said, that's a really good question. Let's go see Tommy. The truth is, so maybe someone watching the DVD after this is done going, yeah, well, why is that? Well, you know why? Because you're going to need to be able to function out there in the heavenlies, and you're going to have a glorified body to do that. This wasn't about, the idea was kind of like, well, God just loves us so much more than everybody else, he just decided to give us a glorified body. And the rest of them, well, he likes them okay, but, they're not getting one. It's not that issue at all. This is an issue that makes our vocation in the heavenlies possible. Right? So, I mean, there was purpose behind that. So when you're operating out of that ignorance, you don't mean to, but Satan loves that. He loves it when people don't know the difference between God's program with Israel and the dispensation of grace. He loves it when people don't understand the doctrine that comprises the mystery of Christ. He loves it when they don't, because all of that doesn't demonstrate that God's plan is being successful. So I think, I'm sorry, got back to your question. Yeah, he knows. Okay. So, all right. So he's accomplishing the mandates of the Davidic covenant. All right, here's the next one. The book of Psalms is divided how many parts? 5. All right, and here's the next one. What do those divisions correspond with? Each one of those divisions correspond with one of the mandates of the Davidic covenant. And I showed you Psalm 1 to 41 is the Redeemer Psalms, and we went all the way through. And by the way, at the end of the last session, I put all those numbers up. If you were here, I put them up, and you could see how all those Psalms divided out. Okay, now that we've done all of that, wow, we've really got to fly through the rest of this thing. Somebody have a question? Do we have one more? Oh, the book of Psalms pertains to what time in Israel's program, and it refers to the fulfillment of what events. Thank you. Okay. Psalms pertains to the climactic stage in Israel's program and the fulfillment of the 5 mandates. Okay, any question about these 11 questions? Okay, when you were answering these, did you do okay? All right.
You give us so much information, I don't always know what you want us to put.
Okay. Okay, well, that's fair. Okay. All right. You ever come into, now to get to the notes of where we're at, let me set this up this way. You ever come into the middle of something that someone's watching on TV, you're not familiar with the storyline, and you just feel lost. You don't know who's who. You don't know any of the backdrop to the action that's going on. In fact, you can't really figure out who's the good guy or who's the bad guy. And you look at all of that, and you kind of, you need something to give you a context for understanding what it is that you're looking at. And in a sense, folks, that's what Romans 13:12 is like if you don't have the backdrop to what is supposed to be. Because in that short little phrase, and you're going to see this. You're not only going to see it today, but you're going to see it again next Tuesday. And by the time we get through with this first phrase, don't roll your eyes back in your head like we're going to be in this first phrase forever. But you're going to look at that and you're going to say, yes, I do see how all of that is packed into that phrase. And I needed to know every bit of that in order for this phrase to make the kind of sense to me that it's supposed to make, to do the work in me that it's supposed to do. Okay, now, having said that, let's take a look at the verse. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. And the first place I'm going to take you to is going to be over in the Psalms. We were looking at what Satan was doing following the flood when he was once again producing the world of the ungodly and bringing those things to pass. His works of darkness, let's cast off the works of darkness. His works of darkness are not only the means by which he produces his night, but they are also the means by which he produces the ungodliness of this world. And I'm going to say it to you now, but it may not make the sense to you that it's going to mean in a little while later. But they're the power source that is behind what he is doing. In fact, there is a title that we're going to learn. When you talk about Satan and his goal, the plan of evil, and those steps over there in Isaiah chapter 14, there are a couple of titles that he has that are in connection with becoming like the Most High. And you know that title, the Most High, is the possessor of heaven and earth. And so he's known as the Prince of this world. And there's half of the goal, to be possessor of heaven and earth. And the other one is the Prince of the power of the air. And that is the heavenly portion of that goal. So those are two titles that have to do with him being like the Most High. And that, of course, stated over there in Isaiah 14. And we're now going to, not right now, but we're about to see another title that is actually in connection with what he is actually doing to produce this night of darkness. And that is the title called, the power of darkness. Now we're going to come back and look at the details of this because it is important for all of us to be able to understand when he functions as the prince of this world, it is different from what he does when he functions as the power of darkness. In other words, there are things that he is doing underneath those titles. These have to do with him being like the Most High. This has to do with him producing this progressively, increasingly dark nighttime that has overtaken the world, that brought it to the very place of being worthy of being destroyed. But instead of destroying it, God, because he is accomplishing something else in the dispensation of grace, is enduring with much long suffering those vessels of wrath that are fitted to destruction. And then once this is over and the final part of that night has transpired, then the Lord's day will dawn, and just like the darkness of a physical night is dispelled by the dawning of the day, the Lord's day is going to deal with Satan's night. And so, and again, we're talking about this terminology here. Now, so what we're after here is we're going to go back and we're going to begin to look at some of these Old Testament passages very quickly. And these, are, of course, are going to be important for the believing remnant. The book of Psalms is going to be important for them to know about this. But I will tell you, so why do we need to know this? Well, I'm going to read you a verse that Paul writes in a minute that tells you why it's important. But let me just put it this way for now. There are some parallel issues between what Satan is doing with the believing remnant and what he will do out here with the believing remnant. And as we talked about, the Psalms are prophetic in nature because they're talked about in relation to the 5 mandates of the Davidic covenant. Well, the Redeemer aspect has already taken place. Where's the next one? Deliverer out here in the day of wrath, that's prophetic. And so you have the believing remnant that's going to be facing some issues out there, and there's some parallel issues to what Satan is doing with his night and his works of darkness in this dispensation of grace, with what he is also going to be doing with those things to the believing remnant out in that final portion of the night. All right, Psalm 11, and look at verse 1. To the chief musician, a psalm of David. In the Lord put I my trust. How say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For lo, the wicked bend their bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privately shoot at the upright in heart. Now, I talked to you at the end of the last session about this a little bit, but this is part of the mocking refrain that is going to be told to the believing remnant out here, because Satan is not ignorant of that admonition that is given in the Olivet Discourse. Remember, we went back and saw that in Matthew 24. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then he said, let them which be in Judea do what? Flee to the mountains. Well, they know about that. And so there's this mocking that this is actually meant as an attack against a form of doctrine that the remnant relies on. It is meant, look, anytime you speak, I'm trying to think of a word here, but if you want to denigrate what someone believes, there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to attach a kind of an embarrassing term to it and make it seem like, oh, that's a terrible thing, or to actually talk about the very thing that they are trusting in a disparaging way. That's what's being done here. So they're saying to them, oh, you members of the remnant, flee as a bird to your mountain. Oh yeah, run off to your mountain like you think that's going to help you. This is part of the disparaging remark that is supposed to put them on the defensive and make them think, Am I really this thing is designed at its end to make the believing remnant regret they were ever part of it. And if it does that, believe me, any light that the remnant was going to have is going to be extinguished. And it's not time to talk about it in detail, but that's exactly what the increasing darkness is designed to do, is to extinguish the light. And although we haven't talked about it yet, and we will, you have to know that look, if I say it to you now and I say it to you again in a few lessons, it'll be because then we're going to do the details of it. But you need to understand that when John the Baptist showed up, and that's the start of the climactic stage in Israel's program, that the light that was in Israel and in the world was almost completely extinguished. You have to understand that when John shows up, look, you know what they've come out of? 400 years of silence where they didn't hear a peep from God. What did they do during that 400 years? They created things. They created written documents and they created offices in Israel that actually corrupted the truth of the law. Let's use the words the Bible uses. They made the law of none effect. Let's talk about what the prophets said they would do. They made void the law. And Jesus comes in and he starts giving us corrective doctrine, and it's running contrary to what is taught by the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and the lawyers and the chief priests and all the others that are the leaders of the nation. And so that puts him immediately at odds with them. And as he is giving this corrective doctrine, and John writes about him, by the way, we're going to go over to 1 John because he's going to talk about this issue of light and darkness. But as he gets ready to introduce this over here, when Jesus shows up, the world, what is God, look, prior to John the Baptist, is God working in the Gentile nations of the world like he is in this dispensation of grace? No, they're on the other side of the wall of partition. They're without hope and without God in the world. Who are those Gentiles worshiping? Every false god you can imagine. Just think of Paul at Mars Hill. What'd he say? Yeah, I mean, you know what? And that's what Paul says. Hey, you got this thing here to the unknown God? I'm going to declare him unto you because you guys absolutely don't know it. The Gentiles, how much light is in the Gentile world? None. How much light is left in Israel? Because all they know is the corrupted doctrine of the Pharisees. That light is almost completely extinguished. So when Jesus shows up, guess how John writes about him? As the light that lighteth the world. That's how he's introduced. And then you know what he says to those that believe he is the Messiah? Ye are the light of the world. This is a light that shines in a dark place. And so what the policy of evil is designed to do is to extinguish that light. This is part of the process that's being used to do that. Because if you can take a member of the believing remnant and make them back off, then that light diminishes and the darkness grows. And that is what he's after. Now, I'm talking in these kinds of terms, and we haven't even defined these terms yet, but just by saying it that way, you understand something about it. But you're going to understand something about that in much more detail than that. Here's the other thing I wanted to do. Back me up one to that Psalm reference there. He says, for lo, the wicked bend their bow. Now, we talked about them in the last session. The wicked, those workers of iniquity, those were not referring to just people who had a sin nature that happened to do some sinful things, but these were those that were at the very heart of Satan's policy of evil, who were stoking the fires and powering the train, so to speak, that is moving that policy of evil down the track. Okay, now let's go to Matthew 24. We'll just take a look at this thing. This is the verse we were quoting a while ago. Then let them which be in Judea flee unto the mountains. And the apostate members of the nation, folks, are going to use this kind of thing to ridicule the members of the remnant. If you ever watch this in a modern debate, all someone does is they take something they know the other person is going to say, and then they kind of say it in a ridiculing type way. Here, I'll give you one that's bannered about all the time. And I understand what's being said by it, but I also understand what's happening there. When someone says, oh, well, you know what, if we have a problem with education, all we do is throw money at it. You ever heard that? But you know, now I understand what's being said by that, but by saying it that way, throwing money at it, it gives you the impression that we're just kind of flinging stuff out there with no real design behind it. And that makes that appear to be terrible, right? See, because I would think that some teacher that's getting a salary would not be looking at that like they're just throwing money at it. Now, I do understand that there's not a solution to spending more money when really the policy is bad. I get that. But what I'm saying is, anybody wants to win a political debate or any other kind of debate, you demean the other person's position. And so you couch it in ways that makes it look like it's disreputable. And that's what's happening over in Psalm when they're going to say, oh, flee as a bird to your mountain. Like, oh, you know about that? Oh, yeah. This is the beginning of what is going to tear down the very doctrinal defenses of the believing remnant. Now let's go back to Psalm 11, verse 2. For lo, the wicked bend their bow, that they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privately shoot at the upright in heart. And by the way, there's something about that when it says privately shoot at the upright in heart. This is going to be very cleverly done. A lot of this is going to be done behind the scenes to members of the remnant to get them to doubt, to get them to be confused. This is the same type of process that Satan is going to use to tear down the churches of the believing remnant, where they're not going to stand up publicly and declare some crazy doctrine that will dissolve the church, but they'll go around behind the scenes and they'll just meet with people and they'll just go, you know, really, the Lord, I mean, I know we talk about the Lord and all, but that's just kind of an idea. The Lord himself really didn't show up. And you say, well, why do you choose that? Because that's the one Peter says they'll start using. They'll go to the members of the believing remnant, and through feigned words, they will make merchandise of them, denying the Lord that bought them. Remember what 1 John says? And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. Because that's the very example of the doctrine that's going to be foisted upon the remnant. And that thing is meant to destroy the very foundations of what they believe. I'd like to be able to tell you that that's not going to work, but it will. That's why John is going to write the very examples in there so that they will be prepared for that. You say, well, what if someone doesn't know about that doctrine? They're in the same boat we're in if we don't know the doctrine. We'll be running around doing all the things that we do, and Satan will be laughing his head off because none of it will be in line with what God is doing in this dispensation of grace. It'll be the same way for them. Okay. Psalm 11:4, the Lord is in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in heaven, his eyelids behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence. Now, see, his eyelids try the children of men. There's the world at large. But now he's got a special group he wants to talk about his attitude toward. But the wicked, we talked about that term as it's used back in the Old Testament. The wicked is not just about guys who, do some sinful things. These are the movers and shakers of Satan's policy of evil. They are the workers of iniquity. And he says, these guys, but the wicked and him that loveth violence, and that violence has a particular aspect that's going to come to pass out there in the day of wrath. He says, his soul hateth. Now we have this idea that God just loves everybody. Well, I'm looking at what these guys are producing, and God doesn't just say, I don't like what they do. God says, my soul hates them. Now, here's my question. If any of those, and they won't. But you say, well, if they repented, would God forgive them? Yes. He forgave Saul of Tarsus, didn't he? I'd say Saul was pretty much opposed. He forgave him. Now, but you know what? They won't. Someone says, but could they? They could, but they won't. I just want you to get that in your mind. And when God says, because of what they're doing, this is not generally, this is not a guy that, told a lie about the size of the fish he caught. These are people who are pushing the policy of evil. God says, my soul hates them. That is even now. This, in fact, the only way you'll know this attitude that you have for when the night is far spent before this dispensation of grace comes in is to know what God's attitude toward all that was up to that point. And so that's why we're going back and looking at this, because if you're going to have that attitude generated in you, now this is not a license to go out and hate everybody that you don't like personally. We're talking about the drivers of Satan's policy of evil. And this is how God feels about them. All right, now let me take you over to Psalm 14. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. By the way, we always use that to talk about, well, that's the atheist, and we talk about that issue. It does include that, but there's more to it than that, as you might have well guessed. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They're all gone aside. They're all together become filthy. There's none that doeth good, no, not one. And when you talk about Psalm 14, you're talking about a condition that is just like the condition of things I was describing to you earlier when John the Baptist shows up as the forerunner for the Messiah. That you're talking about a world that is plunged into darkness. And you know what? And now we're seeing this kind of description. They're corrupt. They've done abominable works. There's none that doeth good. I used to look at that not really knowing what that was about. And I used to think, there wasn't anybody? But you have to understand, there are times when Satan is producing an intensity of darkness in the world. That is how God is viewing it. So, let's look at this next one, 4. And by the way, in your Bible, I'm just giving you something you can write in the outline. So if you brought it with you, here's 2 of the mandates that are going to be found in Psalms that you can write in the margin of your Bible. He says, have all the workers of iniquity no knowledge? Who, by the way, workers of iniquity, that's the wicked that we just got through talking about. That's this group. Who eat up my people as they eat bread. You remember I used that terminology last time when I said, what is that one? What do they want to do? They want to swallow up Israel so that the name of Israel be no more remembered in the earth. Remember that? Well, here's where that comes from. They eat up my people as they eat bread. They just swallow them up. They're gone. And call not upon the Lord. There were they in great fear, for God is in the generation of the righteous. You have shamed the counsel of the poor, because the Lord is his refuge. Now look what they're saying. Oh, that the salvation of Israel will come out of Zion. That's the deliverer concept. So if you write that in the margin of your Bible, when you look at that, you'll be able to locate it. And then it says, when the Lord, and I try to put it in a different color, it's just not showing up very well. When the Lord bringeth back the captivity of his people. And that's the avenger concept. In other words, you know what they're saying? When these 2 things happen, then Jacob shall rejoice and Israel shall be glad. Don't you know they will? When the deliverer and avenger concepts take place, that is going to bring joy to the true Israel. And so those are the things that are being talked about there. I have some things in my notes here that are not in your notes that I was going to talk about, but I don't think I can because I've only got a couple of minutes left. I'm just looking over them to see if there's anything that I want to... Oh, man. When he said... no... Well, I'll just work it in another time or something. I'm running out of time. Let's go to Isaiah 65. That's the next one here. I am sought of them that asked not for me. I am found of them that sought me not. I said, behold me unto a nation that was not called by my name. I've spread out my hands all the day unto a rebellious people, which walketh in a way that was not good, after their own thoughts. And that, take me to the next verse. It's going to be Romans chapter 10. But I say, did not Israel know? First Moses saith, I'll provoke you to jealousy by them that are no people, and by a foolish nation I will anger you. But Isaiah, is the Greek rendering for that, is very bold and saith, I was found of them that sought me not. I was made manifest unto them that asked not after me. But to Israel he saith, all day long have I stretched forth my hands unto a disobedient and gainsaying people. Back me up one verse here. Okay. He was saying, I've spread out my hands all the day unto a rebellious people which walked in a way that was not good. That's what, remember when he quoted Isaiah? Now give me that next verse. He says, Isaiah was very bold and saith, and now he's quoting that passage that I just showed you in Isaiah. So you know what we're finding out here? This is not just what was happening in the world at large with the children of men. This is happening now in God's own nation as well. So I'm just trying to show you both parts of that before we get away from this. Let me give this last one because we're going to run out of time. Isaiah 65. A people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face, that sacrificeth in gardens and burneth incense upon altars of brick, which remain, by the way, those are religious issues, okay, which remaineth among the graves, and lodge in the monuments, and eat swine's flesh, and broth of abominable things in their vessels, which say, and here's what they will say to the remnant, stand by thyself, come not near unto me, for I am holier than thou. This is how the apostate nation will view themselves, which is why they're going to say, flee as a bird to your mountain, because you're not going to be able to escape, because you guys are the apostate ones. You guys are the ungodly ones. Don't stand next to me. I'm holier than thou. I'm keeping the law. I'm doing what was prescribed. I'm involved in the things of God. And then here's what God says about that. These are a smoke in my nose, a fire that burneth all the day. So let me just talk about this and we'll stop right here because we really need to get somewhere with this. When you ever stand around a campfire and you're roasting hot dogs or marshmallows, I don't know how it works for you, but here's what, whichever side of the fire I stand on, the smoke changes and blows in my direction. And I just almost want to walk all the way around the fire, just to watch the whole thing just move with me. I don't know why it happens like that, but it does. But you know what? If you get close enough and that smoke gets in your nostrils, you know what you do? Your eyes water, you start coughing, and you know what? You got to get away from that for a minute, right? Because you're not, if smoke is in your nostrils, you're not going to put up with that for very long before you have to do something about it. And that is exactly what's being talked about here. These are a smoke in my nose. God's saying, I'm not going to put up with that. It has an effect on me that it's going to force me to do something. A smoke in my nose, a fire that burneth all the day. It's a continual thing. And that means, you know what? If the smoke is burning, you've either got to get away from it or you got to put the fire out. And God says, I'm not going to get away from it. I'm going to put the fire out. I'm going to put an end to the smoke. This is part of the attitude that our Heavenly Father has toward this. And so, as we're looking at that, you know, I got this other thing in Isaiah. Can we read this last verse? Give me that next Isaiah. Behold, it is written before me, I will not keep silence, but will recompense, even recompense into their bosom your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together, saith the Lord, which have burned incense upon the mountains and blasphemed me upon the hills. Therefore will I measure their former work into their bosom. And when he talks about iniquity, iniquity is the word that describes how God, the offensiveness that describes the utter abhorrence that God has for something. In other words, it doesn't matter if it's a sin that's done or iniquity is not just another word for sin. It is the word that God uses to describe the absolute objectiveness. That's not a strong enough word. The abominableness of something that in His estimation is at the peak of things that are offensive to Him. And that's again this group that we're talking about. This is the group that is called the wicked. And later when he calls them the workers of iniquity. Or here when he talks about your iniquities. That's the group where he says, my soul hates that group. And he's describing the offensiveness to it. Now, we're not going to spend a lot more time doing this because we got to get through this, but I need to get us back to where, well, and we will. When we come back, I'll get us on the terminology that we need to get on. Okay, so we'll stop here, take a break, and we don't have long. What do we have here? You have minus 1 minute for a break. Okay.